Reddit hub presents from r/AskReddit. Serious, what is the creepiest thing you found in a forest? A dead raven skewered on a stick that was sticking up from the ground like a signpost. It had its wings spread wide and beak and eyes open. Found a tombstone in the woods when we were kids. The area in front of it where the casket would be was sunken in about 6 inches. Looking around there were other similar sunken in areas, but no other tombstones. It was a woman's name on the tombstone, and she was born in the 1800s and died in 1914. This place we called the tar pits. They were these deep ruts in the ground, maybe 3 to 4 feet deep, and they were filled with this purple/green muck that acted a lot like quicksand. It sucked whatever stepped in it in. If a small vehicle got stuck in it, it normally took a bulldozer to pull them out, with significant damage to the vehicle in the process. The stuff would rip the bumper right off of a vehicle while being pulled out. One summer, we had a brutal drought, and the tar pits dried up. The bottom of the holes was a giant pile of bones. Animals that I figure stepped in it and couldn't get out. A lot were clearly deer, with some squirrels, possums, and some that cold been foxes or dogs. I would still love to know what that shit was. I haven't been over there in years. I don't know if it's still like that. A sled caught in a tree branch about 30 feet in the air. My friends and I went canoe camping in a new provincial park. We had this neat trip planned. We'd get flown into the middle of the park without canoes and canoe our way out over the course of a week. First night, everything is pretty normal and cool. Next day, we go over to the head of a trail up a mountain. Mountain is a little bit of a misnomer. It's Ontario, so our mountains are pretty small. The base of the trail is in a campsite. We get out of our canoes and go up into the campsite to find the trail. The campsite is a wreck. Like, clothes tossed all around in the mud. A dehydrated meal that someone clearly hacked into with a knife, barely eaten. Snack wrappers and trash. A couple pairs of shoes. 3 different tarps, torn down and muddy. A sleeping bag, I think. Thing you wouldn't expect to be left behind, even with the messiest of campers. No sign of anyone around, but plenty of evidence there had been at least 3 to 5 people here. No sign of a canoe. Keep in mind, this is a lake you can only access via several days of canoeing/hiking or a plane. To this day, we don't know what happened there. It was a week before we got out of the park ourselves, and we were in a rough state when we did. It was a very rainy trip, so we never really found out what had happened. Some members of our party said that they saw a canoe at the site the previous night because they'd wanted that site and it had been occupied, but we woke up hella early and didn't see anything leave. Our best guess is still that someone had an emergency, maybe hypothermia. It was real rainy, they'd called out for an emergency rescue, and in their haste, left behind a lot of stuff. I discovered a suicide. Smelled decay while on a hike through Boulder's Flatirons, scrambled up a boulder into a small rock shelter that served as a climbing access, and my sight was met with the underside of a pair of boots and a Glock in a shriveling black hand. He'd been there for about a week, so animals had at him. Not pretty. A face full of maggots and wasps, still but moving. Made me hyper aware of my eye's own orbits. I had dreams of wasps crawling in and around them. The smell stuck with me the longest. Back in the summer of 2018, I decided to go hiking with a friend. About half an hour into the trail we discovered someone hanging from a tree. The guy couldn't have been older than maybe 30 to 31, but it was quite the surprise and shock from what looked like an apparent suicide. Volunteer firefighter here. This happened around late November of 2018. Dispatch drops our tones for a missing 16-year-old female. We are told to meet a sheriff's deputy at the fire station and await further instructions. I turn on my dash light and drive to the station to meet up with everyone else. We get the girl's clothing description, last known location, etc. We all get in the trucks and start driving around to each of her friends' houses, gas stations, the school, all the local businesses and motels. Our town has a population of about 1,500 residents with only a handful of local businesses. My partner and I were pulling out of one of the gas stations when I thought I saw someone walking in an empty cornfield. I tell my partner to stop as I grabbed the spotlight off of the floorboard. I shined the light on what I thought was going to be our missing person, but it was actually a man mid-40s wearing torn up jeans, cowboy boots, and a torn white t-shirt stained with what I thought was dirt. I get out of the truck and start walking down the hill and into the field. I called out to the man, and when I did he turned and started walking away. I told him politely that he wasn't in trouble and we were just looking for someone. Then he stopped, but didn't turn around. As I tried to get closer to the man, I felt a sudden urge to go back to the truck and leave. I turned around and started quickly back up the hill towards the truck. About halfway up I turned around and the man, in an empty fucking cornfield, was gone. I ran the rest of the way back to the truck, slammed the door, and told my partner, get us the fuck out of here, and did you fucking see that shit? He says he did, and that he too had an uneasy feeling while I was talking to him. I don't normally believe in the paranormal, but this is something you can't just put off as smoke and mirrors or your imagination. It's just one of those things that remains unexplainable. Shortly after this encounter, the police chief ended up calling off the search for our town and shifted the attention and manpower to the next town over, where the missing girl was later found unharmed, partying and drinking with her friends. As for me and other firefighter, we don't talk about the man in the field. Ever. A raccoon head. Just the head, pretty fresh. I checked it out pretty carefully, and it hadn't been decapitated with a knife or anything, so I figure an owl had sat in a nearby tree picking it apart and just dropped the head. But it was unsettling. A pair of shoes along with an old Nokia phone. Caged dogs, used for dog fighting. Was both brutal and terrifying. They were vicious, barking their heads off and ready to rip my throat out, but covered in scars, missing chunks of their body, and without ears. I believe the owners sheared them off to prevent competitor dogs from having something to grab hold of. When I was around 12 years old, I was in the woods across from my house with my cousins. There are a few spots with random junk strewn around. Country folks love dumping garbage places for free, so we were poking around. We found an old-fashioned milk can and tipped it over. A bunch of liquid spilled out, followed by a dead baby pig. We completely freaked out and ran home. Probably should have told our parents. It's not super creepy, but was hiking with a guy and stumbled upon an entire deer skeleton. All the bones were there except the skull. Everything else was picked completely clean. When I was about, I would say 12, a dog of ours went missing. At the time we lived in an area with a pretty big forest behind it. My dad and I decided to search for her about a day after she went missing. We came to a small clearing in the woods. We smelled something horrid and looked around. There we saw her lying down with what looked like a large knife of some sort basically propped up on her stomach. The brief glimpse I got of her still haunts my dreams. This was about 7 years ago. A silver women's ring that had its "to late" etched into it. I still have it to this day. The weirdest part is that it was laying on its edge perfectly when I came across it. I had woods behind my house as a kid. I used to go back there by myself all the time and explore. One day when I was 12 or so, I stumbled across what looked like a little campsite under dirt and tree outcropping. There were towels, clothes, and some car parts scattered all about. This is fairly odd for a small stretch of woods in a regular neighborhood. I didn't think anything much of it then, cause there was plenty of junk like tires back there anyways. 2 days later, all of the kids in the neighborhood played a nightly game of hide and go seek tag. While my sister was looking for a hiding spot, a random man jumped out from a bush and ran into the woods. My sister ran home to tell our parents that a strange man was hiding around the neighborhood. The cops were coincidentally in the neighborhood at the time investigating car break-ins. Turns out the guy my sister came across was stealing car parts and hiding them out in the woods behind my house. My brother and I found a dead dog, but looking back I'm pretty sure he had killed the dog and just brought us there later. My mother's story, she had gotten out of the car to stretch during a long drive and she came upon a clearing maybe 5 minutes into the woods. On one side of the clearing was a tent with someone moving around inside of it. Inside the clearing was a pile of deer carcasses, maybe 20 in all, and one dead golden retriever on top. She was so freaked out that she ducked behind a bush, only to find a set of women's lingerie and a pair of high-heeled shoes crammed under the bush. She ran and never looked back. I still get the creeps from this story. I was with a buddy and we were thirsty and had nothing to drink. We went looking for some berries to eat and found a cooler full of ice and beer. A homeless encampment made of abandoned shipping containers arranged in a loose circle, and probably a roll of duct tape with a jar of Vaseline, both very old. Strange stuff to find in a forest. We camp Allet. Where we camp there are a lot of old mining cabins out in the mountains along the Forest Service roads. No one is ever back there, except people ripping through in a jeep. We were camping one time and my kids brought a metal detector with to see if we could find anything. Buried about 3 feet down around one of the old cabins was this big 1 foot by 1 foot metallic rock. Looked almost like silver. It was very heavy and would go off under the precious metal setting on the metal detector. We wrapped it up in a towel we had laying around and set it in my truck. We were certain we found something expensive. When we got home, I grabbed it and thought that's weird, it seems lighter. I unwrapped the towel to find a bunch of broken twigs. My kids, 11 and 13, thought I was messing with them. We still go back every year looking for it, but have no clue to this day why it was gone. Maybe cursed and a good thing it's gone. Exploring the woods as a kid, my friend and I found the pit that the local chicken farm, small scale non-industrial, dumped the bodies into. Oh man, I'm late, but have I been waiting for this question? Around 2002 to 2003, I can't remember. I was at my best friend's house for the weekend with another friend there as well. Now my friend lived pretty far from town down a country road in the woods, this East Texas. You had to turn off a farm road and down a dirt road into the woods a couple miles to get to his driveway, also dirt, and cross his small bridge over a pond to get back there. I'm going into detail too much. My point is he lived in the middle of fucking nowhere. We had explored the woods around his house before but never went too far. This particular day we decided we were going to hike the woods much further. We were walking for a couple hours and came onto a path clearly made by a four-wheeler and followed it. At the end of the path, which was only a couple hundred feet, there was a small clearing in the woods and in the middle a cabin. The cabin was a couple feet off the ground supported by blocks and had a front deck. We decided to check it out since we are dumb kids. The windows were all barred, the door was locked. It gets weirder. The cabin was surrounded by playground equipment. Old playground equipment, like 1950s to 1960s era. When we walked behind the cabin, that's when we all three got really scared. There were several mounds of dirt and shovels laying about. Almost like graves, but we couldn't know for sure. We decided to leave at that point and found our way back to my friend's house. It gets weirder. A few years later, when we were all around 16 years old, it came up in conversation and we decided one day to go look for it again. This time we brought my buddy's .22 rifle, just in case. We eventually did find the path again and followed it, but this time, when we got closer we could hear people and decided to peek through the brush and see. Everything about the cabin looked the same as before, but this time there were 4 grown men with 2 four-wheelers standing there talking. And I mean some hillbilly looking dudes, y'all. We were a couple hundred feet away from them and watched them for maybe 30 seconds before one of them spotted us and yelled out to us. He got on his four-wheeler and we ran. We ran as fast as we could until we couldn't hear him anymore. After that we never went back. And my friend moved closer to town that year. It still gets brought up in conversation sometimes and all of us have a real sick feeling about it. Doctor, my friends and I stumbled onto a creepy cabin in the middle of the woods when we're 13. Went back a few years later and were chased by hillbillies on 4-wheelers. When I was 14, a friend and I would go fishing just about every day of summer. We would walk about an hour to hour and a half through the woods and over bogs to a series of rivers that we called the Steadies. They flowed into a very large lake. The last trip there, we were walking along one of the rivers. The rivers are narrow, maybe 5 feet across. At 14, very easy to jump across from side to side. Anyway, we stumbled up on a large pile of animal bones. We kinda got worried, but assumed maybe a hunter caught a dead game there. We walked to the edge of the bank and right in the center of the river, clear as day, was a large footprint. Barefoot, distinguishable toes, but just one. The left. It was big, even more so magnified by the water. I called to my friend to look, but as I said his name I heard a loud rumble and the trees shaking on the other side. I looked to my friend, but all I saw was the dust he was kicking up from running away, to which I promptly followed. Never went back. We told people, no one believed us. This happened about 15 years ago, where my friends and I went walking in the woods in West Michigan during early spring when there weren't any leaves on the trees and the ground was pretty matted down after the winter. We were having fun on shrooms and taking a long walk when I spotted a small sealed jar, so I picked it up and there was something inside. I got excited because it looked really old and it seemed someone either lost it or they wanted someone to find a time capsule or something cool. Anyways, I opened it up and it was poop. That was the highlight of the day. When parents purchased a plot of land in the forest, they found an old rusty baby stroller. In the forest, that is a part of a town only on the papers. I still can't think of a why would anyone bring a stroller there and then leave it. My dad and I went camping at a well-known campsite in Texas when I was probably around 20 or so. We decided to go on an afternoon hike. We found what appeared to be a man-made shelter. Nothing super creepy here. The next day we went back around the same time and saw a neighboring campsite sleeping bag plus a gun there. When we came back, we asked them if they had built it. They hadn't, but did report the items as missing or stolen. About 3 weeks later, there was a mass murder and the weapon obtained was similar to the one we saw. We have no way of knowing if it was connected, but I just remember feeling really weird about it after the fact. Link is in the description of the video. A Polaroid photo of a naked mid-20s guy in a bathtub looking very scared in 2007. An old tin roof shack with piles of clothes and voodoo bottles. My parents owned a large piece of property with fields, patches of woods and multiple dilapidated 100-plus-year-old structures. Out of all the creepy shacks and barns, the one that gave me the heebie-jeebies was one in the woods at the corner of our property by a swampy pond. It was uninsulated with a bare wood floor and no lights and a deep hole outside for water. There was a rolled crusty white wall tire tied to a tree like a swing. My dad said when they first moved out there 30 years ago there was an old black man that lived there called the preacher man. He had a guitar and would play songs and sing spirituals and stuff. He said the old guy would roll a wheelbarrow up and down our deserted country roads singing to himself and collecting junk out of the ditches. Hence the mound of leftover garbage still inside the shack. The woods were always quiet around there, which was nice for hiking around during the day, but got spooky in the evening. One day I noticed that there were old bottles placed high up in the branches of a bunch of the trees around the shack in the pond. Supposedly it had something to do with voodoo. Carcass of a dead, murdered dog near some upside down crosses and pentagrams. Not kidding. New Jersey is a hell of a place. A fleshlight filled with potato salad or something of similar consistency. I'm done with that park. A 1956 Strato Chief with a human pelvis in the back seat. Kinda odd. Was paintballing in a small patch of woods on a farm that belonged to my friend's family friends when I was a teen and found a bag of VHS tapes. My older friend who knew the family took the VHS tapes home. I never found out what was on them, but we were never allowed to play paintball there again, and the two families had a falling out. To this day, my friend nor his family has told me what was on those tapes. Probably just porn the farmer thought he was disposing of, but sometimes I think it was something worse. A cigar wrapper and something in a different language, carved into a tree, some clown masks and a sign that said heart to K. We thought it meant love to kill, because a kid went missing in our neighborhood. Turns out it was just a bunch of weirdos that like clowns. They turned up clean, but I still try to stay away from them. Another time I saw a parking space in the middle of the woods by a pond with a really weird piece of concrete on. There was a golf cart. Maybe not that scary, but kinda weird in hindsight. My grandparents lived on a pretty isolated farm that was located near some woods. As a kid, I sometimes went in there, but never too far. One time I found a wooden sculpture of a bird in there. I brought it inside the house to show my grandparents, because I thought it maybe it belonged to them, but they told me they had never seen it before. At the time, I didn't really think too much about it. But later, I randomly remembered it and started thinking about how weird it was that I found it there. Like I said, my grandparents lived pretty isolated, but the sculpture had to end up there somehow, right? From what I can remember, it was definitely too heavy to be able to be carried by the wind, so I think that someone came really close to my grandparents' house and then left it there for some strange reason. When I was young, like 13, a little girl in my town went missing. It was a huge deal. The whole town was shook by the mystery. I don't know the details, only point that they looked for her for months and never found any trace of her. Well, a few years later I was in the woods not far from where I live. I was hiking out there just enjoying nature and I stumbled across a pink stuffed bear, very worn and dirty, missing one eye, and torn on one of the seams, and it had been shot through its stomach with 6 arrows, at the base of the tree. I reached down and picked up the bear, and when I stood back up I noticed that there was a picture hanging on the tree of that little girl. Spent most of my childhood in the woods, so I've got a couple stories. The creepiest man-made thing was likely a prank. Someone set up a bunch of those little Blair Witch stick people things around campsites the year it came out. I only saw brief bits of the movie before that, but the older kids in my Boy Scout troop were freaked out, and I got scared secondhand, haha. The actual creepiest thing was a live mountain lion. I don't know if the wind kept our scent off it, or if it just didn't feel like messing with humans or what, but the bastard walked almost right through our camp. Probably 7 to 7.5 feet long. You don't realize how big that is until you see it skulking past, muscles rippling under its pelt. Found a human hand. Pretty fresh with skin on it and blood. Friend called the cops and they took it. Never did find out who or what happened. Okay, trigger warning for this. A tricycle and a pair of Dora underwear in the middle of a forest about 50 miles away from the nearest residential property. I know there could be a perfectly mundane explanation for this, but that's not where my mind went first.